around the bowl. Now that this is nice and smooth, I can add my egg. And now this is something a little different. A little tip I picked up as a baker's apprentice. I add 1 egg yolk, raw, and I also add an egg yolk that's hard boiled. Now what this does is adds a nice consistency. It matches the sandiness that I want in the dough and in the baked crust. So to make it easier to blend, I just push it through a grater. And now I'll separate my egg and put the yolk in with the hard-cooked egg. And I'll also add to this half a teaspoon of vanilla. Give this a quick stir. And I'll just stir this to blend. All right. Now for the flour. Since it's all about getting that sandy texture, I use cake and pastry flour. It's a finer grind and has a lower protein content. That guarantees you'll have a tender tart shell. Pop that into my sifter. Lastly, a 1/4 teaspoon of salt sprinkled in there. Quick sift, and I'll just stir to bring the dough together. There we go. Once the dough comes together, you'll find it's quite soft. So you certainly can't roll it right now. You need to give it time to chill. So I'm going to shape it, wrap it in plastic wrap, and pop it in the fridge. You want to shape it into a cylinder. And I find it takes about 2 hours for it to really set up. After it's had that time to chill, it's ready to roll. This is probably one of my favorite pastry doughs. I make it on a regular basis. And I cut it into 4, and then I cut each piece in half. That way I have 8. This recipe makes 8 individual tarts. You could use little fluted tart tins with removable bottoms, but I'm using tart rings. Give you a nice straight side to your tarts. If you find the pastry's a little cold, you can actually knead it just a little bit to soften it, and that way it won't crack. It's okay if this softens up a bit as you're rolling it. Take your tart ring, press in the shell gently, then with a paring knife, just trim the top of the pastry off. That way you have a nice clean edge. When you're placing in the dough, take the time to lift it in and press it right into that bottom edge. That way you have straight sides to each tart shell. These aren't quite ready for the oven yet. I want to chill them down about ½ an hour. If I were to bake them right now, because the dough is soft, they might risk shrinking down a little bit, and I don't want that. More room for filling. After 30 minutes, they're ready to go in a 325 oven. The last thing to do before you put them in the oven is take a fork and pierce the bottom of each tart shell. And these take about 18 to 20 minutes to bake. They'll turn a nice golden brown right around the top edge. While those tart shells bake, it's the perfect time to start on the butterscotch pudding. And it all begins with the butterscotch, a butter caramel sauce. Now, I have some water here, and I'm going to measure 3 tablespoons into my pot. I always like to put the water in first. That way, the sugar immediately starts dissolving as soon as I add it to the pot. There we go. I also use a tablespoon of lemon juice. The acidity helps the sugar stay liquefied, which I want as it caramelizes. Never want it to crystallize. Measuring my 3/4 cup of sugar into the pot. So, I've got everything I need to get started. So now, without stirring, I let the sugar come up to a full boil over high heat. And then occasionally I brush the sides of the bowl with a little water and a clean pastry brush, just to make sure no sugar droplets stick to the side. It's all about keeping that sugar liquefied. The darker you let this caramel go, the more intense the flavor. Oh, that smells fantastic. Now I'm ready to take it off the heat and carefully add that butter. Grab a whisk and whisk it in. That hot sugar immediately melts the butter, but it also toasts it a little bit. Oh, so it intensifies the flavor. That's really, to me, what defines butterscotch. And there it is. So I can let this cool a little bit, let my tart shells bake, and then it'll be time to finish up that butterscotch pudding and top my tarts with meringue. got my tart shells cooling, my butter caramel made. Now it's time for the butterscotch pudding. And this style of pudding really is the American style, that classic style you find in almost any cream pie, except mine I'm topping with meringue. The first thing I want to do is measure half a cup of demerara sugar into a pot. A traditional North American pudding is thickened with cornstarch, and that's exactly what I need, 6 tablespoons. I whisk that together with the demerara sugar before I pour in the milk. Just combine the two, that way I know I won't get any lumps in my butterscotch pudding. Now I'll pour in 2 cups of milk. I'm going to whisk that and just let it sit for a second to let the sugar dissolve. The remaining quarter cup of milk I'm going to pour over my 6 egg yolks. So now that butter caramel I made earlier is still warm, and I'm going to whisk this and then pour my caramel sauce into this milk and egg mixture. And another key flavor element that you find in butterscotch pudding, a large measurement of vanilla, a full tablespoon. The last ingredient, just a teaspoon of salt. There we go. It even looks like butterscotch now. Now back over to my pot. Now that my demerara sugar has had a chance to dissolve, I'm going to bring this up to a simmer over medium heat. You can tell when your mixture is close to thickening because all of a sudden the little bubbles that are at the top disappear, and then you're left with a thick, glossy mixture. Here you speed up the whisking a little bit. Now I take this off the heat and spoon a little into my egg mixture and whisk that in. So now I'm warming up the base so I can add this entire mixture back to my pot. So I'm going to take it back to the heat and pour this in at once. Now that I've whisked this until it's nice and smooth, I take it back up to just below a simmer. When I just begin to see a bubble or two, then I can pull it off the heat. But look at that beautiful butterscotch color. And I do like to strain it. This is homemade pudding after all, not a mix. This is the style of pudding that can get a pudding skin if you leave it uncovered. So it's important to cover it with plastic right on the surface. No dreaded pudding skin here. As it cools, it will thicken up, and then once I chill it down, at least 2 hours, it thickens up even more. I'll set that aside. And I have one chilled, that way I can fill my cooled tart shells. So with that setting, it does set up firmly, so I like to soften it. And here are the cooled baked tart shells. What I like to do is take 2 spoons and dollop in that butterscotch pudding. I fill them right to the top. I love the contrast between this sweet, rich, creamy pudding and the crisp yet tender pastry shell that's underneath it. Now it's time for the meringue. So I've got my 6 egg whites, and they're at room temperature because I get better volume that way. And to coax the best volume, I add a teaspoon of cream of tartar, and I want to have ready half a cup of granulated sugar and 5 tablespoons of icing sugar. This is a French or common meringue. It's the most basic style of meringue, the type you'd find on top of a lemon meringue pie. There we go. So, start this on high speed. Once it's foamy, I'll add the sugar and then whip these to a medium peak. There we go. Nice glossy medium peak. I don't whip to a stiff peak. That way the egg whites have room to grow and then they'll set once I bake them. 2 more spoons, and now I do just a single dollop on top of each. My husband has owned up that butterscotch cream pie is his all-time favorite. So he was a taste tester on this recipe quite a few times. These are ready for my hot oven, 400 degrees, but don't go far. It takes about 3 to 5 minutes. I'm just looking to brown the tops of the meringues. Oh, beautiful. These are nice. Incredible. So let me grab one. You know, you've this great combination of the sweet crust, you've got the fluffy meringue on top, but let's be honest, it's all about the butterscotch pudding. And it's amazing what we've learned, from the old-fashioned creamy rice pudding to the French malted milk chocolate pot de creme, all the way to these individual butterscotch meringue tarts. I hope you take all of these pudding ideas to your own kitchen to bake and enjoy.